Greetings, everybody. Welcome to 1 Degree of Scandalous with this man over here, Kato Kalin. I'm Tom Zenner. This is episode number 8.
New studio, baby. New studio with Tom and Kato. Studio. I feel like I'm going to rap later. I don't know. I just got this weird feeling.
You never know. You never know. No headphones. That means we have a guest in-house. We'll tell you who it is in a little bit, but stick around. This is going to be one hell of a show today. New studio. Kato, you mentioned it. Third Wheel Productions. They moved, a few miles. We're here in Hollywood, working out some of the kinks here, but this place is going to be a phenomenal space. We just moved.
It's
good.
Like
a little
closer for me at home and all that.
Moving some stuff, and Zach got us all set up here, so we're good to go.
No gas for me. I just coast down the hill, make it.
Yeah, it's nice for you, right?
Oh, yeah, it's bad for you.
Yeah,
nice for me.
I don't care. It's nice to get on the road a little bit, get stuck in traffic. There's nothing more LA than that. You're heading out tomorrow. You're going to Reno. Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, going to Lake Tahoe. Just got back actually from Salem. I've never been there before. Of course, Salem, Massachusetts, where it's the witch hunting. I was blown away. I had the best time. I was hosting a show called Outlander, which is very popular, especially with the females. Outlander on the Starz Network. It has 6 seasons, and another show called The Last Kingdom. It's so popular, they're doing a feature film on it now. I met the cast. They're coolest people I've ever met. No attitude. All actors from Denmark, Sweden, Scotland, and London, all stage actors, some in Bond films, which I love. Anything, 007.
It's nice where you can go work a gig where you have the biggest ego. I mean, that's good, isn't it?
Oh, huge ego, huge ego. They actually knew stuff about of course, the OJ trial and all that, and they had some questions, but they were like, they didn't care. They just said, "You are funny, mother," in an English voice. "You're so funny, Kato. I love this."
So
guy.
the normal reaction you get.
Yeah, the normal reaction.
All right,
and
that's
the
what
girls,
it's like.
And the girls, when they call me Kato, they go, "Kato, you really are brilliant."
Hey, by the way, is there a
vibe
vibe in the air? I mean, with the witches allegedly being back there in the past, could you feel anything like that?
Completely. All the cabs are called Witch City cabs. Everything's related to witches. They say you can't even get into the town the entire month of October. It's just filled with witches. And I think part of my rap song is going to be talking about witches and bitches. I'm kidding. Look at him, already rapping. I'm already rapping, baby.
He cannot be stopped. I just got back from New York and DC.
Yeah. Your trip was even better than mine.
Well, we had fun, and we took the kids, and it is just so exciting to know that New York City is back and better than ever. It really felt awesome being there. We were in DC, had so much fun, especially with kids when you can go to the monuments. We went to the Holocaust Museum. We went to a bunch of the Smithsonian's, saw all the monuments. So we did all that. And then shout out to my good friend, Willie Dominguez. I've been going to his restaurant on Mulberry Street in Little Italy for the last 18 years. I might have to bring him on the show sometime and tell you about what we've been doing at his place for almost 20 years. And Hotel Marmara on Park Avenue, had a great time staying there. So I want to give those guys a plug because, man, it was fun. I didn't know. I was wondering, okay, everybody says New York's back, right? But I wanted to see it for myself, and it was, I thought, even better than it was, 3-4 years ago. So kudos to New York City, and hopefully LA can stay on track.
When the New York cheesecake has graffiti on it, New York's back.
Right? Good point.
Whoa.
Okay, so show today. It's going to be outstanding. If you're a hip-hop fan, if you're a fan of pop culture, for the past 30 years, we're going to have, obviously, Kato and another super authority, someone who's lived through so much of the big things that have happened, who knows so many key people. He's seen it all, and he's just doing so many great things in the community right now. So are you ready to bring him in, Kato?
Yeah, I was going to say also with that, it's incredible how with rap music, and I'm going to be educated today, how it's started out of probably even towards the end of the 80s and 90s, and just how it grew, and now it's just, it's a $1 trillion industry.
Yeah, and the guy who was at the forefront is sitting on the couch over here to our left. So let's introduce Jaime Shepard, LA native, South Central, born and raised.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Such a fascinating background, doing great things for the community, which we're going to talk about throughout this show. Very positive force, but he also knows everybody. He was the road manager for Tupac Shakur. He is close friends with everybody from Death Row Records. He managed some of the biggest hip-hop acts of the 90s and 2000s, period. He's close friends with him. He was around for so much of the iconic moments that happened in that industry and in L.A., over the past 30 years. So, Jaime, thanks, man. I appreciate getting you here. I've been working on you for a little while.
You have been working on me because some things aren't meant to be told. Some things are meant to be held on to. But, I mean, I'm excited about this, and I'm excited about being in front of Mr. Kato.
Yeah,
Mr. Kalin. I mean, you grew up watching TV, and Kato was one of the guys that man, you heard a lot about him, but it's just a blessing to really meet him and see that he's really a great guy. He's not the guy that they painted him to be.
He's not the guy that you and Tupac wrote about in a song about 38 or 30 years ago. But we'll get to that in 25 years
I've
ago.
had so many tears, but it's funny because Tom's saying that you've managed all these careers and you look like you're still a teenager.
No,
You
these
must have
grays,
started-
these grays are telling my age, and I think I'm going to embrace my grays right now because initially I would dye it, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and embrace
that's
it.
how
and
it
let
is.
go.
A few of them pop out and you don't want to admit they're there.
No.
But then you'll rock it. You look at, hey, do that again because we can see some of the glistening.
No,
on your
I'm not going to do it yet. I don't want to premature show my hand.
Jaime, we're gonna use an Instagram filter. Don't worry. You want Mayflower? Do you want Juno? What filter would you like? Anyways, you look great.
You know, the fascinating thing, when Jaime walked in here and met Cato for the first time, you guys realized you had something in common. You used to hang out at the same cigar bar that Jeffrey Dahmer frequented in Milwaukee. Do you care to explain yourself, gentlemen?
Well, I don't think Dahmer was smoking cigars. I know, it's funny. I was there on my last visit. First time I've been there, but I was invited to go to this bar, restaurant that supposedly has ghosts.
Yeah, it's supposed to be haunted.
Haunted, but there's another hotel that all the teams that are visiting in the NBA, they stay at a hotel called the Pfister Hotel.
The Pfister Hotel. That's where I stayed. I stayed at the Pfister.
So is that like the one 5-star hotel in downtown Milwaukee or one of the few?
Yeah.
Right.
And that one, by the way, I can't think of what NBA player he refused to stay there because he saw a ghost. I'd stayed there a few times. I'm telling you, my door did open twice, and I'm not joking when I say this. I had the goosebumps on my arm because you hear about it. But it's a beautiful hotel, but I really believe it to be true. I think they've done documentaries about the Pfister Hotel.
It's so funny, when I was at the cigar lounge, my business partner, he said, man, I want to go to the restroom, but I'm afraid. So I said, man, come on, man. I'll go to the restroom with you, man. I'll be your bodyguard. So we go into the restroom. As we get in the restroom, in the middle of him using the restroom, I turned the light out. And he was like, stop playing, stop playing, stop playing. And it was just funny. I got a kick out of antagonizing my business partner.
That's
He
hilarious.
goes, look at you did to my shoes. I peed everywhere. Don't turn off that light.
Okay, but there was some truth that I mentioned about Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Wasn't he rumored to have frequented that?
Yeah, they said this was the
cigar
place
bar?
that he hung out, and who knows?
God.
It might be the place where, he met some of the people that eventually became victims. Yeah.
I always tell people, Jaime, that I could always relate to Jeffrey Dahmer because I used to live off people too. But no, wait a minute. Hey, whoa, wait a minute. In rehearsal, you laughed. No. Everybody brings up Milwaukee, Dahmer, happy days.
Yeah.
I wish they wouldn't because the city is. It is gorgeous. It really is. It's got great history, great food, and I stick by my old Milwaukee.
No, you should.
Because that's my
Milwaukee,
hometown.
It is,
I
and
love
people got a taste of that when they were watching the Bucks play the Suns in the finals a couple years ago. They saw how fun that was out in the Deer District where they'd have 100,000 people out there. Absolutely incredible. So here's some of the things we're going to talk about on the show today. By the way, if you're new, if you're just catching us for one of the first times, make sure you download and subscribe. We've got so many great episodes, of course, on a lot going on with OJ. We had a great episode on Ariana Grande in the donut licking episode. We were all over the Johnny Depp trial too. And just great guests every single week. But another thing that Jaime does is he does work in professional sports in a very high level where he and his business partner, we're going to talk about this later, they manufacture, design, and provide the championship rings for the championship teams, and it's going to be a great conversation.
He's got some
samples. Jaime, luckily you're big enough where you probably don't need a bodyguard, right?
No, I don't need a bodyguard.
Jaime, he's the only guy that dresses in the morning and goes, spotter. Can I get a spotter, please? No, those are beautiful rings, and I got to see being from Milwaukee, I know
it's
he
a
designed
beautiful
it.
ring.
So,
Milwaukee
Jaime,
Bucks ring.
let's go back to the beginning. I know, you're from South Central. You grew up in L.A. Maybe just take us through that. Born in the 70s, child of the 80s, growing up and seeing this city and everything that came out of that area. Not the easiest place probably to grow up. And
Not the easiest place to grow up because I grew up, I was born in the 70s. I came of my own in the 80s where I started school and I did the things, and it was during the crack epidemic. And because it was during that era, it was a lot of people that never had, now all of a sudden they were able to have. And in them being able to have, they were able to make money that just was crazy, like crazy numbers. But then on one side, one person benefited, but then it destroyed a whole community. So one person was making a whole bunch of money, the other people were addicted to a drug that was extremely powerful. And then some of the things that you see during that time was crazy. Like you'll see mothers that want to give their children to the drug dealer until they get paid on the 1st or the 15th. You'll see women that are exchanging sex for for drugs. But it was just amazing. They said when they created crack cocaine, it rocked the world. And I saw firsthand the devastating effects that crack cocaine had on the urban community, South Central Los Angeles.
Well,
it definitely affected
And
us.
like we saw the movies, right? We didn't grow up in it. We saw it. Boys in the Hood, Colors. Do you have memories of that with the
I mean, Boys in the
helicopters
Hood was
in the
was
air?
so funny. Boys in the Hood was my life story. So when you see it and you grew up in that era, you could relate and identify to it. And it was sort of washed down. They didn't really show like in depth some of the things that transpire and the decisions that you have to make. Because what's crazy is when you're a kid, everybody has a fantasy of becoming a superhero, or then when you get a little older, maybe a doctor or a basketball player or that. But when you live in this environment, if you don't have the right influences, you become a victim of your circumstance opposed to a victim of your imagination. The imagination disappears and you think that this is it. So then you get stuck in certain things. And it's just tragic because I lost a lot of friends to the streets, whether it be drugs or prison.
How much is that peer pressure of when you're teenage years? How did you stay away, or I don't know if you're involved, how it happened for you, and how you see friends like, hey man, don't do this, it's going to ruin your life.
But I think for me it was different because I had parents that constantly reinforced my identity to
that's
me.
the key.
So whenever the world would say different things and put labels on who they wanted me to become, I always knew in the back of my mind. But though, regardless of having two parents that were from they were ministers in the church, my grandfather was a bishop, I still flirted with the streets because I was fascinated by the power that these gentlemen had in the streets. My parents worked a 9 to 5 my whole life, and I thought it was cool, but my cousins who were selling drugs, they had the cars, they had the women, they had the clothes, they had everything. So when they have all this stuff, you look at your parents who, they're struggling to make bills, but then you look at your cousin who, he got the women and the cars, you're like, man, when you're weighing it, it's an easy decision based on you only seeing one dimension. You're not seeing that this guy has to worry about the police. He has to worry about people that want to rob him. He has to worry about all these different variables that when my parents went to sleep, they were able to sleep all night. But this guy, he wasn't able to sleep because he always was worried about where something was coming from.
So you have parents that were together.
My parents were married 58 years before my dad passed in 2012.
Did you find that the friends that you had that were parentless or didn't have fathers gravitated to having your parents kind of be their parents also?
Man, it's so funny. When I was coming up as a kid, my mom, she was an elementary school principal she was a teacher for 20 years. She was a principal for 40 years. But in the morning before we left to go to school, I would have all the guys from the community ride with me to school because my dad would drive me to school. And my mom, she would want to pray with all the guys before we left school. So every morning she'd get them together and say a prayer. I was embarrassed at the fact that my mom wanted to pray because I wanted to be the tough kid. I didn't want to be the kid whose mom was praying, so I tried to get out the house before my mom could ever say anything or get there. And what's so funny is I would rush out the house before she got out the shower because I didn't want to pray, because I didn't want to be that non-tough guy. But then one of my friends was incarcerated. He went to jail when we were 18 years old. And in one of his letters, he said, I thank God for your mother because your mother taught me how to pray. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be surviving in this situation that I found myself in.
That's amazing.
Is he
And I was
out
like,
now?
wow.
Is he still incarcerated?
He's still incarcerated.
LA was just such a different place back then. There was over 1,000 murders a year. I mean, LA, it was such a violent time to grow up and dangerous. I could see how you made some of those decisions.
Dorsey High School, 11th grade here in Los Angeles. Matter of fact, today is a good friend of mine's birthday, Keyshawn Johnson. He went to Dorsey High School with me, the football player. But what's funny is, in the 10th grade, I saw a young man get murdered, and he got shot.
In the streets?
Just outside of the school. Just outside of the school, he was shot. And I just was... You saw so much death that you almost got callous to death. So like now when you experience death, your perspective of death is totally different than a normal person because you've experienced so much of it. I never thought that I would be here today when I was 18 years old. I couldn't see past the next few days. But it's just a blessing to just be here.
To think that in your mind you might not make it to 25 or 30. And almost having to accept that. It's crazy.
I think it's interesting that you... I don't know where you were raised, but isn't the streets divided up like in the 30s to the hundreds? It's like different areas.
So what in Los Angeles is blocks. So you go 3-4 blocks one direction, you have one gang. You go 10 blocks a certain direction. So in the area that I grew up in, you have the 30s. The 30s cover from 30th Street to 39th Street, and that's the area called the 30s, which is a street gang. Then you have the 40s. The 40s are another 10 block. Then you have the 50s. Then you have the 60s. And then it goes all the way to the hundreds. But it's street gangs in the South Central Los Angeles. But the crazy thing about it now is these areas that used to be infested with gang violence have been gentrified. So now these homes that used to be $100,000, they're going for $1.5 million, $1.6 million. So what the thing is, all the people that left those communities because of gang violence or whatever it was they wanted to flee, now they're realizing we need to be back in the city because we're centrally located in the middle and the heart of the city. So if you want to be anywhere, you can be anywhere in Los Angeles in 15, 20 minutes, opposed to being in the valley. So it's just amazing how things are changing.
So when you growing up, when you go from the 30 to 39, what if you go from into the 40s and 50s? Are you risking your life?
So the crazy thing is I went to Dorsey High School. I went to Crenshaw High School for a day, and Crenshaw High School was a Crip neighborhood. I grew up in a Crip neighborhood, so I went to Crenshaw. The principal just so happened to be a friend of my mom. So because she was a friend of my mom, she saw the guys that I was hanging with, and she said, oh, no, we're not going to do this. Either I tell your mother what you're doing, or I send you to Dorsey, which is going to save your life and get you on the right track. And I said, whatever you do, just don't tell my mom what I'm doing. So then I ended up going to Dorsey, and at Dorsey High School, it was a blood neighborhood. So I was forced to stay in school.
Yeah.
Because outside the school, each day I had to run down the train tracks to get home because some of the Bloods would chase me home because they knew the area that I was affiliated with. But once I got to Crenshaw, I could flick them off, and I got tough because it was an imaginary line that most of the time they didn't want to cross. But it was definitely real. You had to watch what you wear. You couldn't wear certain colors. You couldn't wear certain shoes. It was a lot of things in the 90s that you had to be considered. But I told somebody that when I went to college, the beautiful thing about growing up in South Central Los Angeles and the era that I grew up in, the beauty was that if you could survive South Central Los Angeles in the 80s or the 70s, you could survive anywhere in the world.
Yeah,
because
it
taught you certain survival skills that it became a part of you. Like when you stand in the street, you never stand with your back against traffic. You always want to see traffic coming. When you're pumping gas or anything, you always face the street because you never want to be surprised. But these things, when you sit in a restaurant, you never sit with your back to the door. You're always watching the door. But it's funny, some of these things you don't even think about, but when people meet you, they see it and then they call you on it.
Yeah, it's street smarts, and I'm sure you incorporate it to this day. Okay, so it's interesting. You grow up going to church, gospel music, a big part of your life, I'm sure.
And
with
some
your
of
mom.
the toughest criminals in the world grew up in the black church because their parents and their grandparents definitely had faith, and it's not that they didn't love the Lord, they made choices because of their circumstance. When you can't see the forest through the trees, a lot of times you find yourself doing things that you never thought you would do. And then that's where it changes. Instead of being a superhero, one day you wake up and you decide you want to be a gangster or you want to be this. And what's so funny is, on top of that, a lot of the musical influences, when I was coming up in the late 80s, when I was in high school, they had this Black Power movement to where music shifted, and you had Public Enemy, you had KRS-One, and they were saying, I'm proud to be black. Fight the power. They were giving all this conscious thing. And then all of a sudden, this thing that I was affiliated with was born, and it was called gangster rap. And gangster rap, it came out and it was like, we're keeping it raw, and we're gonna give the story, we're gonna put a voice to the conditions that we go to. And one of the first songs was Express Yourself by NWA. And when they came up with this, all of a sudden the pendulum shifted to where, opposed to us having pride for being black and wearing African medallions, all of a sudden now we start glorifying the lifestyle of being in a gang and hustling and street stuff. And then all of a sudden, music took a whole different shift.
So how'd you make that segue yourself personally? When did you meet Suge Knight? When did you get involved with Death Row Records? And was that a tough thing explaining to your mom that you were part of this crew, or was that just part of you managing acts and then you became friends with him and it just kind of evolved?
Because my mom was an elementary school principal, my grandfather was a pastor of a church, I've known our family is pretty popular in the city. So I've always known a lot of people. My mom, I have a personality that's similar to my mom. My dad is pretty low-key, but my mom was one of these people that she never met a stranger. She could hold a conversation with anyone. So because of it, my mom never tripped off of my associations because I could talk to anybody and I could befriend anybody. And she was comfortable in my relationships. But the funny thing is I've known Suge Knight my whole life. Like when I was coming up as a kid, I admired him because he played football at Linwood High School. And I just always thought that he was just the coolest dude in the world. And I envied him because he was, when you grow up how we grew up, young boys respect strength and it's a presence. And this dude has always had a presence. Like he walks in a room and everybody wants to know who he is. And it's not because he's a big guy. Some people just have presence, and he had presence.
Yeah.
But isn't that unusual? That wait, I think wasn't Suge a blood in your crip? Isn't that?
And it's so funny. In my neighborhood that I grew up in, some of the guys in my neighborhood used to say, well, "What you doing messing with him? Like, he's this and he's that." And I was like, "Man, he's my family." And the first week that we started hanging, I made $20,000 cash just being around Suge. So if you guys want to have a problem with it, we can line it up and we can fight right now, but he's my family, and you can't do anything about family.
But does that put a target on you, though?
Not at all, because at the end of the day, Death Row was formed, and you had Snoop Dogg, who was a Crip, and then you had Suge that had his mob homeboys that were Bloods. So when it comes to making money, even in the hoods that you grew up in, it's blood gangs that make money with Crip gangs, because at the end of the day, if somebody sees an opportunity where they could benefit from it, they put that on the sidelines. The only reason that people are engaging in the criminal activity or in the gang violence is because they don't have opportunities. Once the opportunity presents itself, man, let's get this money and let's put this shit on the side burner.
Yeah, Jaime, when you are in the early days of watching everything happen with Death Row, and you see these talents and these superstars.
Man, we used to hang out at a club.
But here, let me ask
Cannon.
you this: when you bring Snoop Dogg's there, Tupac, you got Dr. Dre, you got you see the power of Suge. Did you see this ending poorly for some of them because of?
No, I thought it was just going to be an uphill thing, and we were just going to keep ascending and ascending. The funny thing is, I remember in 1993 before Snoop hit. It was probably 1992, late 92, 93. We used to hang out at this club called Club Cannons. And Club Cannons was in Long Beach, but it was a place that all Snoop Dogg, Nate Dogg, rest in peace, everybody would hang out in Long Beach, but then they would have like live shows. And there was a dude named Obo who was a promoter. At the time, I was going to school, but then I came home from school to take a break to work in the music industry. So it's so funny, I was working at the YMCA, the Crenshaw YMCA, and I had it was a van that we would take the kids out. I would take the van, the YMCA van, and I would go to Long Beach to the club, but I'd have 10, 15 gangsters in the car. I had Tupac in the car. I had all these guys in the car, and we would be driving. One night when we were leaving the club, we're pulling out of the club, and the police officer pulls us over. So when he pulls us over, I'm terrified because there's guns in the car, there's weed in the car. Like, it could have been bad not only because we could have went to jail, but it would have been bad because it was my job. And my mother got me this job, so all the guys were like, you can smell weed in the air, like it was bad. So the guys were like, man, you want us to talk? I say, don't y'all say nothing. Let me handle this. So I shake it off and I get myself together. The police officer asks me to come out the car. When he gets me out the car, I said, sir, I'm working at this group home for these young men that, they needed to blow off some steam because, they really had a pretty rough life. So I took them out and we hung out. They might have smoked a little weed, but I just need to get them back before curfew. And the guy was like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah, they're really good guys. So the officer looks at the car and he says, okay, young man, I'm just proud of what you're doing. And he let me go. And I was like, whew. But those were the days.
Yeah,
Those early days with Snoop Dogg were just seeing Snoop perform before he became Snoop Dogg and to watch the evolution of the culture. It's just so funny. I feel like the foundation of the culture was built, and I was there in the early stages when it was built. And just watching from the sidelines, it was poetry in motion. Just beautiful, the directions that it went.
You know, when you think of Scandal, there's probably a lot of them that you were around, saw, maybe helped them avoid. Were there a lot of moments where this could have ended on a spot? Someone could have been killed. There was dangerous situations. The business could have imploded. I mean, did you see years and years and years of this?
I mean, if you listen to the music, man, the music is a reflection of the culture that we grew up in. And I think prior to the death of Tupac and Biggie, a lot of people were fixated on talking about death and dying because it was a reality that we lived with for our whole lives. And I think the power of life and death are in the things that you speak. And it's amazing that right after they were murdered, you don't hear people just fixed on death and talking about death. Tupac had a song, If I Die Tonight. Biggie had an album called Life After Death. And it was all of that. And then it's just funny how the conversation shifted after they passed because people really realized the power that words have.
Yeah, I think it's foreboding. I think that I think a lot of rappers. This is once again, I'm being educated by you, but you hear in lyrics that they know. I think they know something terrible happened. Like Tupac would say, "I've got such a curse. I know my life will end up in a hearse." So you're like, this is a song he's singing.
But it's PTSD, man.
They know a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if you put it out there. It could happen, and it happened to a lot of them. Nipsey Hussle, and it's just so.
It's
It's
tragic,
just incredible.
though.
It's
tragic.
It's tragedy. Do you think education of you come from a mother and a father? Don't you think that is the number one thing of getting your head straight?
Well, Suge Knight had his mother passed a few months before my mom's, and his parents were married 60 years. So I think it's choices, and we're all attracted. It's a book by James Baldwin, and it's called Sonny's Blues. And in the book, it's two young men with the same biological parents riding in the back seat of a car. And one kid sees the beauty of Harlem, and he sees the people going to work wearing suits and dressed up. But then the other son sees the drug dealers and the prostitutes, and he sees something else. So I don't think it's a formula. I think it's just what your attractions are, and everybody has different attractions.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the time with the films back in the day when it was starting, where you could see how it's going to build and become an empire when they started making films like New Jack City, The King of New York, and then you saw it was a violent culture, but money. Greed was
For the
number
love of
one,
money, yeah.
and a sex of getting the best. And
Well, and plus that's what sold. That's what you knew the youth around the country that was emulating the lifestyle in LA. That's what they wanted to hear.
The videos, man. The videos did it for us because we grew up in an era to where we started watching these videos. And I remember MTV, you would have to watch like 5 or 6 ZZ Tops, Motley Crue. You'd have to watch
Bon
like
Jovi.
5 of these rock videos before you could actually see a hip hop video. But then when you saw DMC, and the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I'm waiting. Now you see Michael Jackson. It was this, and then all of a sudden in the 90s, it shifted to where rock sort of died. And I remember going into back in the day, I went into Interscope Records, and the rock section was dead. But then when you go into the hip hop section, to where they were selling albums, it was people moving, they were selling units, but it's just amazing how once hip hop came in the 90s and it came into its own, it just changed the culture.
Well,
the culture totally changed.
what Run DMC had Aerosmith, the help that made Aerosmith also come back in from
Great
revive
video.
their-
Remember where they kicked in the wall?
Yeah,
And
he
the
did
next
that.
thing-
The music was going. It's a phenomenal video.
You know, Kato, it's like sitting with a historian. It's somebody that just, saw the evolution of a way of life. Incredible. I mean, you grew up with these guys here. I know the story of how you met Tupac. It's fascinating. It involves a random chance meeting at a gas station in a tough part of town.
South Central Los Angeles. I was on Crenshaw and Florence, which is the 60 neighborhood.
So just so I know, are you out of where are you at in your life?
I'm out of high school. I'm back in Los Angeles trying to figure out my life and figure out a direction that I'm going in. Was at a crossroads in my life. But again, I knew a lot of people. So it was the irony of it is I'm sitting and I'm pumping my gas. And as I'm pumping my gas, I see this young man jump out of a car. And as he jumps out of the car, he starts to pump his gas, and he had these 15-inch woofers in the back of his car, so he's making a lot of noise and drawing a lot of attention to himself. So then I look and I see some guys that I knew, and the guys that I knew, I saw them moving towards the gentleman's car. So when I saw him moving towards the gentleman's car, I was like, man, I'm
With
not
bad
going.
intentions.
Yeah, all definitely bad intentions. Because good intentions, you could see, all these dudes are just cool. But bad intentions, you see they're contemplating. It's a different kind of move when someone has something negative in their mind. So when I saw it, I go up to the guy and I said, man, look, don't even put the nozzle back in don't take it off. Just jump in the car and take off. Because if you don't, these guys are going to get you. And he looks at me, and he looked me in my eye, and I think it's something when you look in somebody's eye and you make contact and they see that it's real. The guy jumps in the car, goes off the curb, drives into traffic, and then the gentlemen that were there, they asked me, I was like, well, man, why you do that? Like, why you save him? I was like, man, find somebody else, man. Y'all do what y'all do. So I jumped in the car, I drove off, didn't think anything of it. 2 days later, this guy named, his name was Mr. Grimm. He was signed to John Singleton. He was in a movie called Higher Learning. He called me. He was like, man, Warren G is working on this song, and I think you love it. It's fire. And I said, I'm going to pull up to the studio. So when I pull up to the studio, I get there. The same gentleman that was at the gas station runs up. And he's like, that's the big homie. That's him. That's the dude. And he was just so animated. And it was Tupac. And he told them the story, and we talked about it. We found out that both of our birthdays are in June. Mine is June 7th. His is June 16th. We were born the same year. We had a lot in common. I don't know if it's a Gemini thing or if it's just growing up in the era thing, but we had a lot in common, and we
you may have saved his life, too.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, crazy.
Were they going? Did they have guns? Did you think? It was
I mean, most definitely. I mean, shoot.
So
When you're over there, you can't approach somebody to do something if you don't have a gun.
But they knew he wasn't Tupac. I mean,
he wasn't Tupac, so no one knew who he was.
They knew him, though, enough that they don't like this guy.
Yeah, so it's just amazing how sometimes things can happen that, imagine that something happened that day, we would have never had Tupac.
Right.
Yeah, I was reading an article the other day about a friend of mine, Rick James. Rick James in his memoirs was saying that, it was just blew my mind. In his memoirs, he said that he went to a party. His friend said he wanted him to go to a party. He decided that he got so high the night before that he just wanted to sleep in. He didn't want to go to the party. So the guy came to the house and was like, man, let's go. He said, no, I'm not going to go. The next day when Rick James woke up, he realized that the party that he was going to was Sharon Tate's party, where Charles Manson had killed all the people in the house. So imagine, had Rick James been in that house that day for that party, we would have never had Punk Funk. We would have never had Mary Jane. We would have never had Super Freak.
Or he would have killed them.
Oh yeah, he might have.
He might have
killed Manson. Yeah, you never know
because
Rick was a bad dude, man, and had
Manson wasn't there. It was the other ones that he could have handled.
Yeah, he might have been. I never thought about it that way. That's a great way, Kate.
It's funny because Derek Jeter has a new documentary out on HBO, a docuseries that's coming out, and he referenced the fact that he was supposed to be at that nightclub in New York City when J-Lo and Diddy were in there with the shooting. He was supposed to be there, but he said, we have a game the next day, I'm not going to go. But he could have been attached to that. Had that part of his identity and his brand for the rest of his life, could have changed his life. You see these things, man. It's a decision. It's a decision to tell this guy at the gas station to cross the street, to go to a party or not. That's life and death.
I believe in the theory of sliding doors. You either take the door or not. It's like he doesn't take it. The whole thing of what if that day Rick James goes there or whoever. It's sliding doors of what you choose. And then life.
And Jaime, I think it's so easy for people to act. It's a very complex world that you grew up in. I grew up in the Midwest in Minnesota. Cato grew up in Milwaukee. I went to college in California. I have a funny story. I played football against Suge Knight. In college. I played at the University of Pacific. He played at UNLV. Yeah.
With George Maloof. George Maloof played with him on the same line.
Everybody looks at Suge Knight. He's doing time right now. He's done a lot of time in his day. But man, there's a human side to him too. I saw it personally. I'll tell you the story later at a Four Seasons hotel in Los Angeles about 15 or 16 years ago. But how would you describe Suge Knight? Because there's the public perception of him, but then there's also the guy that you grew up with, who's a businessman and maybe has a softer side that you and I have seen.
I think the funniest thing in the world was me and Suge. Suge had a house in Malibu, and he and I are driving in the car, and he has his music going. He's blowing his cigar. He's we in the moment. And then all of a sudden, his daughter calls at the time, And when his daughter calls, his daughter must have been about two or three. So when he gets on the phone, he was like, "How's daddy's baby? How's daddy's baby?" And I'm sitting up here like, I'm looking, and I wish it was a time where we had cell phones and I could have recorded this, because he's talking to this 3-year-old little girl, and he's like, "Daddy loves his baby. Daddy loves his baby." And he's saying it, and I'm looking, because it's just like, if the world could see this softer side of him, maybe it wouldn't be what it was. But when I saw it, but then it was so funny. Immediately, once he hung up the phone, he went back into the cigar, and he was like, "You better not tell nobody that you heard that."
Right.
And I was like, "Man, if you don't get out of here." But it was just those days that moments like that, people see one dimension. And Suge, the thing that was amazing that Suge told me that it's always resonated in my spirit was that you never judge a man unless you know the man. And I think the problem with media, Cato, you could probably even say it,
100%.
a lot of people have a perception of you, but their perspective is limited because they're just getting what the media is portraying of you.
Right.
But until you sat down and had an encounter with you, I mean, it's all speculation, man.
Yeah, media made it. I was a life of a soundbite.
Oh, yeah.
And I played over and over, and someone said, "It's like, oh, that guy is such a airhead and all that." But you know what? I come from a large family. When you have family, when you have great friends, you become tough and Teflon. Things slide off you, and that's what I kind of live by. I kind of know who I am, always been, and I take it with a grain of salt.
And I think it's too,
because I think everybody, red blood, everybody dies, everybody goes to hopefully a higher place. And
Well, I heard a gentleman say yesterday, he said, "You guys hate me on speculation, but God loves me with the evidence of who I am." So when in perspective, as long as I know God loves me, I give a damn what people think.
100%.
Cato, I find it really interesting too, because I think this is the first time you two have met.
Yeah.
Yes.
And your paths have crossed. You've just been involved in a lot of big moments over the past 25 to 30 years. And Jaime,
I've been at a few parties with Cato at Mr. Simpson's house. I've been to a few parties. I was a young boy, and I went to some parties over there, and it was one of those things when your eyes open and you're like, "Man, when I grow up one day, I want to be like this."
Yeah.
And now I don't know if I have that same revelation.
well, folks, let me tell you something. We're going to get to the O.J. Simpson part of this story later, because it's fascinating. So make sure you stick around for this in a little bit. But weren't you? Because I remember talking to you when we were out a few weeks ago, and I said, "Wait till you meet Cato. You're going to love him, right?" And then you have a friend who works as a bartender, right? Who had an interaction with Cato. And
Fran is one of the sweethearts, but she's Milwaukee to the bone. And then when I found out that Cato was from Milwaukee, I just thought that it was dope that, it's a common connection.
Yeah, and it's funny because you were mentioning, before the show, we talked to Fran, who I kind of remember her mother is 101 years old.
101 years
and
old.
At the Dodger game, she said to me, you made my mother's day when she was 97 of saying, "You look beautiful, darling."
Yeah.
And her mother's still alive in a wheelchair. I said, "I'm coming down to see you, and I hope your mom's
See,
around."
people don't hear that kind of stuff about you. People hear stuff about you, and the stuff they hear about you is a coup. They don't see the softer sides of you.
Yeah.
So I just think the media picks up what they want to pick up, and they don't show it. But that's why you can never judge somebody based on their media perception. You have to judge somebody based on the interaction. Now, if you meet him, if I'd have met you and you were a horrible person, then I'd have stuck to whatever it was I thought. But now, I love you, bro. Group hug. Group hug.
Double awesome. That's awesome.
Thank God he's pounding me with the ring's not on.
Oh yeah, we're getting to that too. Jaime, it's. For me, I didn't grow up in the hip hop culture, right? But I grew up in the news business, so I covered a lot of the events that took place in the 90s because I was a news anchor or a sports anchor, so I was in the news station. When you watch what happened, like with the Hit 'Em Up song, right? With some of these diss tracks, was this war real? Obviously, two huge stars lost their lives, but could it have been stopped at some point? Couldn't somebody have stepped in and said, this is really, really going the wrong way?
I think the thing that you must always take in consideration is that a lot of us have grown up with PTSD, but this is before we knew what PTSD was. We grew up with a certain stress levels because it was just something, and it was generationally passed down from our parents. The frustrations of being in the South and dealing with racism, and then you come here, and then the frustrations of just trying to survive as a minority in the city. It was tough. So a lot of these things came. So when incidents transpire and there's a disagreement, a lot of times that stuff flares up in you to where you don't think logically, you think emotionally, and in your emotions, once it gets some wind in that sail, it takes you places that you never thought that you would be. The crazy thing about the East Coast, West Coast beef that just got bigger than life was it definitely could have been stopped. But the problem with it was Biggie, who was a dope soul. Biggie, he wanted to warn Tupac of something. But the problem with, and I say it wouldn't be a problem, but one of the things about Tupac's personality is if you tell him something, when he confronts the person that you told him about, he's going to say who said it, and he's just going to blow it up. And Big had to live in this place. So instead of Big saying it, he's just like, be careful with the dudes that you're fooling with. Well, what are you talking about? So he couldn't go into it. So at the end of the day, Pac got upset with Big, but the problem with it all is the incidents that transpired really shouldn't have transpired, but they couldn't talk about it. Because certain things in the street, once you talk about it, it gets out of hand, and then you bring yourself into something that's really not your business.
And you couldn't text someone at that time. You
couldn't
meet them
do it.
covertly, and plus you're on opposite coasts.
So when he started thinking when Pac started thinking in his mind that different people were responsible for the incidents that transpired, of the shooting that took place, when he started thinking people were responsible, that's all he saw. And then a lot of people start turning their backs on him. People start changing. He was incarcerated. When you start going through stuff like that, the mind is a beautiful thing to where if you control it, it could take you to beautiful places. But if you don't control it, it could take you to dark places. And then those dark places make you vulnerable for a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily want to do or be.
And plus, when someone has revenge in their mind, it's going to happen.
Oh, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
So I guess I got to, get to this question right now. Now that you two have become very close friends, Jaime, you want to apologize to Kato for the song "Shed So Many Tears"? And you guys mentioned his name in there. You got to give us the backstory of the Tupac song.
I like it.
"Shed So Many Tears."
You can't say you guys. You have to say Tupac did it, because I wasn't involved in the creative process that did it. But the thing was, just like today, they'll mention different things inside songs because at the time, that person was hot, and it's a connection. And at the time when we were growing up in the early 90s, Kato was a household name. Like, everybody knew who he was, and whatever their perspective of him was, but everybody knew who he was. So it's not crazy that they would that Pac would put him in a song.
Yeah, and I hope I was the same Kato. I don't even know, but I just remember it because they came to the station. Tupac's people, not Tupac himself, but they said,
No, wait,
I
you
had,
were working
I had
at a
show.
radio
I was
station.
at KLSX in L.A. It was Howard Stern was there. It was a
But we
huge
did
time in
have
my
another
life.
friend named Kato that was murdered. And
I think that's what they're referring
yeah,
to. Because the song is murdered, but then at the station they said, "You're Kato. You're going to hopefully play this song."
Yeah.
So we did. I said,
so
I
they
love
did it, but back in the day, from Inglewood Village Crips, there was a young man named Kato, and Pac would frequently talk about Kato because he lost his life in a robbery, and he was a good friend of Pac's.
Yes.
So it was it was a dual meaning, and it was two different things in it. So some people would say Kato.
Yeah.
I've heard songs and my name sound like it was in it, and I told people they mentioned my name. So
It's sort of like the James Baldwin book you referred to. I'm twin in the back with other Kato.
Yeah.
And we're both looking at life. and thank God I just ducked. No, but it is. And they came to the station, so I said yes. And then that's the first, because my music is, I'm very alternative underground, and it was new to me. But I loved it. When I heard it, I said, this is kind of cool. They have a song, so we played it on the station. We'll play it on this show. We'll probably add that
just
thing.
dope.
But
We're
remember
good.
Kato, and don't you folks forget, remember Kato. Because I used to tell a joke, knock, knock,
Who's there?
Kato.
Kato who?
That's my biggest fear. 3 for 3.
At least he's awesome. Okay, Kato, I'm going to tell you my Suge Knight story.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the first times I met Jaime, and I knew he worked with Suge Knight and was very close with them and very close friends, I go, Jaime, back in 2006, my daughter was 8 at the time. She's 24 now, okay? And she was growing up in the Bay Area, and I was in Phoenix at the time, but we would always be getting together, and we'd come to LA and do fun things. We went to a taping of American Idol, and then we met up with a mutual friend who's a movie producer, Cindy Cohen, in Beverly Hills. So we said, let's go meet up at the Four Seasons on Doheny, okay? And so
regular-
this was probably
our frequently spot.
a Tuesday or Wednesday night. That's another one of your places that you hang out. And then she goes, hey, I'm going to call Suge, because she was close with Suge Knight, okay? And see if he can come out. I thought that was interesting. And then, so Suge shows up, and I had done this card trick. I do this card trick for my kids that they can never figure out. It's a good card trick. My dad taught it to me years ago, and it really is a good card trick. I'm
You're
going to
just
show it
a
to you guys
jack
sometime.
of all trades there, buddy.
So we did it It was Suge watching. And he was so mesmerized by it. He thought it was so cool. My daughter loved him. And she goes, Dad, you know, for someone who allegedly hung someone outside a balcony by his ankles, he was really nice. I mean, because, and that's one of the urban legend stories of Suge. But it also shows you that soft side of him. But was that Vanilla Ice story true, or was that made up?
What's the story? I got to hear this.
There's a little bit, it's truth to the story, but you know, urban legend, it gets wings and it just flies and it turns into something. There was definitely a incident that transpired. The details of the incident, you know, I think was one of those things that we should just leave
Okay,
to
we will leave it
urban
at that.
myth.
Oh, I'll hear it
But
later.
the funny thing is, the night that we met you in the Four Seasons, later on that night, we would hang out there, and it was our frequent spot to where we would go 3-4 times a week. He loved these. It was pomegranate martinis. Like, it was certain stuff that Suge just always had to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then they allowed him to smoke cigars out on the patio in front where the valet
Mm-hmm.
was. But this particular night, we were sitting in the back, and Suge said something to me. I didn't like what he said. He didn't like what I said. So the next thing you know, we're wrestling. And I'm holding him, and we're wrestling, and we're tussling. We break a table inside the Four Seasons. The security comes, and the security are just watching us tussle inside. And the thing with Suge is, I knew if I let him up first, he's going to take one on me, and he's going to get a cheap shot. And I didn't want him getting a cheap shot. So then finally, when I let him go, he did take the cheap shot, and he hit me. And then he got up, and we laughed about it, and we thought it was just so funny. And then he gave the people at the hotel, I think he gave them like a couple $1,000s for the table and for the incident. And then it was just a night. But just like brothers, we fought and we had a great fight. But I could just imagine what the security guards were thinking when they see these two big old guys rolling and tussling. And they didn't even want to jump in. I thought it was crazy.
That typically doesn't happen at that Four Seasons.
No. But he was a regular, so they understood.
No, that's so funny.
Back in the day when you would be, like you said, driving in Malibu with Suge Knight and that, did you ever think like looking over your shoulder sometime?
No, because we grew up in the same places.
No,
so,
not for you, for someone to attack him, that you just happened to be in the car.
It could have been situations where somebody wanted me. So in the lifestyles that we live,
Just live your life.
We always watched our back because
Yeah.
it was just the way life was, you know. And it was so funny then. I wore a thick beard. I had a bald head. So it's even a TMZ interview to where they thought I was Suge Knight. And a lot of times we would go places and Suge would be like,
work.
that's Suge Knight, I'm Jaime. And it would just be, people would be wondering who was who. So it just was funny in those days.
I
You
could
just
totally
never knew.
see that. If you have that full beard,
Yeah.
there's no way people wouldn't get confused by that. That's pretty crazy.
And you visit, he's incarcerated. You go down and visit. What is that like, and how is his spirits? Is it tough for
It's
you?
so funny. The incident that transpired, I remember the day.
You mean on the set of?
I remember the day on the
the
set of the NWA movie. And
Straight Outta Compton.
Suge went to the set, and as he left the set, he got into it with a gentleman. And when he got into it with a gentleman, one of our mutual friends called Suge and said, I think you guys need to get this straight. So when he says, man, I think you need to get it straight, Suge valued the relationship that he had with our friend because we loved this gentleman, and he valued the relationship. So then Suge calls me. And when Suge calls me, he's like, man, I'm about to go, and I'm going to get this stuff straight, and we're going to do this. And I was like, bro, you just got shot. You took 4 bullets outside a nightclub. You're not healthy. You're not yourself. You don't have a gun because you're in a red Raptor truck. You can't carry a gun because you got some cases going. Man, go home. Right. And Suge was like, no, I don't run from nothing, man. We gonna go and we just gonna chop it up. It ain't nothing gonna happen, we gonna go. I was like, man, go home. We could talk about it another day. And the irony of it is, he went on and he went because of the relationship he had with the friend. And as soon as he pulled up, the gentleman that he went to go, not the friend, but the gentleman that he went to go find some resolve with, you can see in the video, he gets in a tussle with them. Mm-hmm. And Suge felt as though the gentleman's hand went behind his back. He felt like he thought that the gentleman was reaching for something. And from there, Suge threw the car in gear. And when he threw the car in gear, he backed up. And he said when he backed up, he thought someone was coming towards him. So then what happens is he throws the car in gear. And the tragedy from that incident is the gentleman that was our dear friend was crossing in front of the car, and he lost his life. And I don't take away from, I think anytime it's a life lost, it's a horrible thing because now you have families and people that are without someone that they love. But it puts you in a tough situation because it wasn't his intention for things to happen. But when chaos is going on, it's hard to have control in chaos. Yeah. And it's just tough. But I talked to him, and the funny thing is after it was over with, he said that he was like, man, I should have just went home. And I think we all have those days to where, you know, what's the decision that I'm going to make? What direction am I going to go? And I just think that sometimes I told him, I was like, man, though it wasn't your intent, something happened. But I never forget one time my father gave me a whooping for something that I didn't do. And when he whooped me for something that I didn't do, I was like, but I didn't even do it. And he said, yeah, you didn't do this, but this is for all the things that you've done and didn't get caught. And I think a situation with him is not to say the life wasn't lost, and I don't take away from the life lost, but it wasn't his intention. It was an accident. But I think this is a perfect time for Suge because now he's able to have some serenity. He's able to work out. He's exercising. He's reading books. He's doing all the things that the noise of the streets wouldn't allow him to do. So I think sometimes things happen for I can't say a greater good because it was tragedy, but sometimes things happen, and from out of the worst things, sometimes the best things are born.
It's all you can ask for. I mean, it's tragic on all levels. You have to think about that all the time, too. Should I have been a little bit more forceful? Should I have picked him up, brought him home? He's sitting there, and, you know, most of us, we have those second thoughts, and we had an extra drink that night, or we did something, but we're home, right? And unfortunately, a life was lost, and he has to live with it. But he's a complex indivial, but there's some really, really good sides to him, and I know you know that well. I thought you did a great job.
My mother he's my daughter's godfather. My mother would call, and I would put him on the phone with my mother, and he would pray. My mother would pray with him. It's a gentleman that's one of the biggest preachers in Los Angeles. His name is Noel Jones. He's the brother of Grace Jones. I would take Suge over to the house, and they would talk religion and politics, and they would play pool. So a lot of the things people see of Suge, they see him as one-dimensional, but he's a complex guy to where we'll sit in the Four Seasons, and you'll have billionaires that are coming talking to him, but then you have some dude that is homeless that he's talking to outside.
Yeah, it's funny because that night, when I told you the story, Cato, Lachlan Murdoch was there as well, and he wasn't very well known. He wasn't the CEO of, you know, taking over for Rupert, his father. But that's the type of crowd that was there. And the first time I told Jaime this story about the card trick and everything, he goes, I think I was there.
I was there.
He was there with Suge that night. Is that crazy?
That is crazy. And I also think with all the stuff you're saying before relating, I think everybody, especially with rappers, I think they're already religious or spiritual in them, and they go through that phase. It's sort of like, I think Kanye was actually religious way back before anybody, and he always was promoting the Jesus. And he was always, and now he takes a beating for it. He does, but I think he's true to himself.
But I think you find out when the rubber hits the road that the only thing that we own in this existence is a faith in something that's bigger than us. Yeah. Like, you could have cars, you could have money, you could have a lot of stuff, but the only thing you truly own is a faith in something bigger than yourself. Yeah. And once you own that, it's something that you can't take. So when the ups and downs take place, a lot of times in the ups, you don't need faith. But in the downs, and you're trying to look for an answer, and you're trying to look for a resolve, or you're trying to find peace, or you're trying to find those things that you need, that's when you lean on your faith.
100% right. Now, Tom, I noticed when Jaime's talking, it sometimes is a glare in your eyes. Wow. And I saw that with the studio lights. Because I don't know if anybody knows these rings he's wearing, because they're glaring in the studio. We're going to show these.
Okay.
And because you talked about the me being from Milwaukee. Yeah. And I want to go through the story, Tom, of the Milwaukee.
I can tee it up for you, Cato.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I love...
Tee it up. Put it on the tee.
Tee it up, baby. Okay,
so
I'll be the caddy.
The extra glare in here is unbelievable. Cato is a huge Milwaukee sports fan. If you don't believe me, check his Twitter. He's a famous,
So
legendary.
you were a fan even when they were losing. So you were still a fan.
He would be so hard on
If you're
those
from
teams.
Milwaukee, you
Yeah.
have one thing: loyalty to your teams.
Yeah. Loyalty
You
to your
love
team.
them when they're in the cellar, and you love them when they're top. But you stay with them
Yeah.
and loyal. And it's so funny that they're, oh my God, I'm getting a rapper that's amazing. I'm very popular with this stuff.
So Cato, one of the great things about Jaime is, when you have the type of personality and the spirituality that Jaime does, you're always going to attract quality people and have opportunities. And the next chapter you went to in your life is fascinating. So Jaime is now a partner with the #1 celebrity jeweler in the world, bar none, Jason of Beverly Hills. So they represent over 300 of the biggest A-list stars. You think of a name in movies, in hip hop, in sports, they're his client, him and Jason. It's unbelievable. Just check it out. Check out both their Instagram accounts, Jason of Beverly Hills and Jaime's. But what they've done over the last 14 years or so, they've gotten into the championship ring game. And everybody knows about this now because the rings get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. You see these athletes that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They're like little kids in a candy store when you guys unveil the rings. And you've done the big ones. They did them for the Milwaukee Bucks. They did them for the Lakers. They did them for the Miami Heat. They're doing them right now for the Warriors. They did all the Warriors rings. You did Tampa Bay Bucks with Tom Brady. So, Jaime, I know you're showing off some of the goods there. Those are legit, too. Those are the real deal, right?
These are the real deal. I have my rings on today. I just have a few of them on. I couldn't bring them all. I just have a few. I have 3 Laker rings. I have 2 Laker rings and 3 Warriors rings on, and just hanging out. It's just amazing to me that I've never played professional sports, but I have like 6 championship rings, and especially being from Los Angeles, it's amazing that I'm able to live vicariously. I'm a part of history in that I might not have played the game, but my history is the fact that we made the rings that these gentlemen wear, so we are part of that history. One of our rings that we made for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is in the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. And I just think that it's dope that something that we created and designed is all over the world. I think it's beautiful.
When you go through designing that, do you go through like, I know the Milwaukee ring, you kind of stay with the culture of a city, you do the
so what we do
fear
is,
the deer, you do the, and who, do you guys come up with that? And you go,
so what we do is we sit down and even before the team wins, because with Milwaukee, the irony of Milwaukee and the whole process was no one thought the Bucks were going to win.
Right.
So a lot of people were talking. Then people say, if was a fifth, we'd all be drunk. If Kevin Durant's foot was just one size bigger, who knows what could have happened. But the fact that when they went on the run, we start like, oh my God, what happened? And a friend of mine was really close with Mark Lazary.
Yep.
And a friend of mine was
owner
like,
of the Bucks.
Owner of the Bucks.
He was like, I know the owner. And when he said, I know the owner, it was like, okay, sure you do. But, here it is. So then when they won, we had already started working on designs because we saw the momentum and we saw the heart. I mean, Giannis had, you could compare Giannis that series to Dirk Nowitzki. I remember when Dirk in Miami, they were talking about getting swept, and Dirk took the team on his back like Moses, leading the children of Israel to the promised land, and that's the way Giannis was. Giannis seemed like as if he was possessed.
Well, Game 7, he was superhuman.
Oh, he was.
We've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
with that,
points.
once they won, we studied the culture of the city. So whether it be Lakers, we already knew LA, so we understood that. But with the Bucks, we had to go and I had to talk to people from Milwaukee. We had to figure out what the culture was like, and we did it. And once we came up with several designs, they brought a few of the players in and the owners. They came together and they made the final say. But we gave them like 5 options of different rings that they could have gone to.
But do they pick you, or do they have other people look at? How did you win the deal?
Okay,
no,
you
you
would not
did.
believe how competitive it is.
Oh, yeah, you did.
These guys have to earn every single one of their deals.
And what's so funny is even when you earn it the year before, the new year you still have to go and you have to earn it again.
Billionaires are hard to please, aren't they?
Yeah,
they
I mean,
are.
I wouldn't
Plus,
say
they
that. I
don't
think the
wanna-
owners are some of the greatest people in the world. I love the owners. I think they're incredible. I just think that people want the best deal and bottom lines. But the one thing that you can't take from us is our creativity. If you look at any of the way the rings were made before we had anything to do with them, rings were basic. They were just generic. They looked like class rings. But then once we got into it, our first ring was the Laker ring when the Lakers won the ring in 2008. And the crazy thing about it is the Staples Center was just built, and we shaped the ring that looked like the Staples Center. Right. And I just thought that it was incredible that we were able to take that. The next year, we took a piece of the Game 7 ball, and inside of this ring, it's a piece of the Game 7 ball inside the ring to where people that have a championship ring will always feel like they have a part of that particular game. And it was against the Boston Celtics, which made it just incredible.
For an LA guy.
And it was Kobe's last ring. The last ring Kobe actually won.
But now the resume is amazing. Now they've got to be coming, like, we want to go with you guys again.
They come to us, but then it's a lot of...
Cato, they still have to fight for it, man.
I know, but it's a lot, like they say, doesn't hurt.
But like they say, my mom used to say, it's a motto that I've adopted, and it says, let your light shine. But when you let your light shine, light attracts bugs. So a lot of times when you're doing really, really good, you get a lot of haters and people that try to hate on you. But the good thing about it is they can't duplicate what we do.
Right.
And we have a great team from our factory. The guys that work in the factory have creativity, but then we have our young guys that work on the creative side. And then it's just, it's a ship. And I just like that teamwork makes the dream work. And we have a great team.
I would have gotten along with your mom because I would have said, be a moth, chase the light.
Be a moth and chase the light.
Go for the light, baby.
I know a lot of the backstory. I know how hard you guys work. You're you're literally in the factory 24/7 trying to meet the deadlines that you have to meet. But here's what I find utterly fascinating, and it blows my mind. We are talking about Steph Curry, Kobe, LeBron, Giannis. We're talking about the biggest stars. Tom Brady. You name a star. You guys do the Premier League in Europe. You do World Cup, the whole thing. These athletes are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, even upwards of $1 billion, but they want that ring so bad. How do you outdo yourself each time? Because the pressure has to be incredible.
But it's just so funny. You mentioning Tom Brady, and I think it was just my mom. I lost my mom December 27, 2018. And after she passed, my whole thing now is making her proud. And when we gave Tom Brady his ring, and me and Tom were sitting up there talking, a tear fell down my eye because it was a moment where I could see my mom smiling and I could see her face and I could hear her bragging about what I was doing. And I think moments like that are priceless. But in the same token, right after we delivered those rings, it's on to the next ring. And my favorite ring is the new ring. Like whatever new design we have, that's my favorite ring. Yeah. But it's just amazing that once we came up with I wouldn't say it's a gimmick, but once we came up with the rings that had utility, every year we got to create something different because we can't do the same thing. And
by the way, you got to hook up Cato with a replica one of the Bucks. Seriously, if you have one, I know
I don't have the replica on the Bucks with me, but I'm gonna hook him up with one. I got him.
Okay.
Cato's gonna get it. That's my word.
That I'm happy.
You got a right hand, Cato. You got a right hand. Okay, listen, time's running out. But we have to get to this because this is one degree of scandalous, and I have to. I mean, you two are legends, and
remind me to get my flight booked. Okay.
Okay. But Cato, I just want to get your reaction when you hear this. And Jaime and I walked through this a couple weeks ago, and Jaime, you don't believe that OJ actually did the actual killings. Is that safe to say?
This is a conversation. I didn't know I was going to actually have the opportunity to talk about this conversation. My only apprehension with the incident is I remember OJ from those days in Los Angeles, and OJ was a 40, what was he at the time? 44.
I think 44, 45.
But 44, like they say, like with dog years. When you're a football player, that 44 dude was really like about 64 because he had a wobble. Like he
couldn't move. Played on
you're running back, and this is the day before you had the training to where even these running back today are pretty. Some of them, I think it's Jerome Bettis said when he gets out of bed, it takes him like 30 minutes to get mobile. Yeah. He got to let the blood circulate. So my only apprehension with the whole thing with OJ was, for him to be able to do all the things that he was accused of doing and then make it back home for a shower and a flight, to me, it just seems absurd because the young man, Mr. Goldman, was in great shape and was 6'3", and he knew martial arts.
He was a black belt.
He knew martial arts, and he was this. So for him to do that and then to kill her and then to drive home, I just think that it's a lot to it.
Yeah, and Cato, you're part of this timeline, obviously. And I can't wait to hear yours. But
and everybody has an opinion.
Okay.
Everybody has an opinion.
Everybody has an opinion on that. And the thing is, we had a show with Detective Tom Lang just 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's so much that we were not privy to knowing of any evidence. But I think if you actually go back and watch that show, have 500 pieces of evidence and how much they had against OJ that was never even brought in, it really does blow your mind. And it's just, it's like I lived in the guest house. I didn't hang out. I was in a different tax bracket than OJ. I had different friends. I wasn't wealthy, nothing.
I mean, but you were wealthy enough to where you were friends with someone.
I was friends with her and him.
Yeah.
But I would say that my opinion, for what it matters, is that he was guilty. And the jury found it was a different time in L.A. at that, and they didn't find him guilty.
You know what's interesting is...
So in your heart, you really believe that he was solely responsible?
Yes.
See, Jaime doesn't believe he wasn't there, right? Or isn't that...
And Jaime, by the way, not the first one to think these thoughts.
I mean, F. Lee Bailey thinks the same thing, too.
There's books of people trying to prove it the other way.
Yeah.
I can only tell you my gut.
I just think that at the end of the day, it was tragic. But then when you grow up in the culture that we grew up in, it's so many situations to where, like the Rodney King incident took place, and the world saw someone literally beating this man, and then all the police officers were found not guilty. So I remember watching the verdict in 1991 with OJ, and it wasn't necessarily even about OJ. It was more about a black man finally got off. So I remember watching 95, not 91, 95, and I remember watching, I believe it was Donahue, and they had the white people on this side and the black people on this side, and when the verdict came up, the black people stood up and were crying and praising it, and it wasn't about OJ because OJ never had a relationship with us in South Central Los Angeles until after the verdict. Exactly. OJ was around, but OJ wasn't a Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson from my whole life has always had community involvement.
Right.
But then once the verdict came out and OJ couldn't go back to the places that he was at, he had to turn around and start hanging out at the Boulevard Cafe. And he started hanging out at our spots because black people are some of the most forgiving people in the world. Because he's one of our sons and the prodigal son has returned. So they perceived him as the prodigal son. Right. So I don't want you to think it was about OJ because we really didn't have a connection with OJ.
Yeah.
It was just a situation where, okay, now we finally see a black man that beat a case because there were so many black men in jail for things that they didn't do.
And that split screen of white and black divided it, made the country worse. Yeah. It just showed they kept playing that over and over. It just set us back.
Do you think fast forward, now you have the situation that took place with George Floyd, do you think personally that things are better? Because after having a black president for these years, you would think things were better, but it's still a divide in this country that we live in.
Completely a divide.
They say it's the divided states of America.
Yeah, I think so too. I just think if people would sit down and talk like we are, I think people just would get it. I don't think people want to have hate, but there's so much of it.
It's ridiculous.
It's so easy. Education, talking. You can settle anything.
Hey, you guys,
and love.
I was at the Yankee game last week. I took my son Dash. We went to the Yankees game, right? You know that stadium has to be split, Republicans and Democrats. Hell, everybody's just cheering, high-fiving, having a great time. You don't care who you sit next to. I mean, politics, politicians, and the media are just doing some very, very bad things to this country. And that's another show. It's another story. Yeah. But you just see it when you just do normal things like go to a ball game. No one thinks about that stuff. Everybody gets along and has a great time.
And to end it sort of thing, I think the world, as people say, the earth is round. Some people think it's flat. But after I see everything else, I know it's crooked.
Yeah. But then I think it stems back to, in sociology, they talk about how it's your influences. Do you choose to drive a BMW because it's a great car and it handles well on the road, or did you see an advertisement and somewhere in subliminally you got a message that if I have a BMW, I could get girls and I could get this and I could get that. And I just think that a lot of us have influences that we never taken the time to validate them or to fact check whether or not it's real. And until I had this opportunity to talk to you, I would have never thought that you were as cool as you were, as cool as you are. But now that I have an opportunity with you, can't nobody tell me nothing about you. I know Tom. Nobody can tell me anything about Tom, but I think the problem with our society is, like you said, people don't take the time to have discourse and communicate with people. They form an opinion of you, and with me, people form an opinion of me, and I'll sit at a bar anywhere in the world, 4 seasons anywhere, and people will look at me and they'll be like, but then once they talk to me, I'll disarm them because, I'm not saying I'm a teddy bear, but I'm a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I agree with that, Jaime. Hey, man, this was a blast. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you coming down here. Hey, by the way, as we say goodbye, just show what that championship medal looks like. That's what it's all about right there.
Subscribe to YouTube. You got to see him, Jaime in person.
Yep.
Jaime Shepard. Check out our Tom, and we're at Apple, wherever you get your podcast, because this show is on fire.
Yep. Hey, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, okay? If you're listening to this on audio right now, go to our YouTube channel because this is some great stuff to see this week. All right, Jaime, thank you so much, my man.
Thank you, my friend.
Cato,
Love
safe
it.
travels. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks for watching, everybody. For Cato Kalen, I'm Tom Zenner. We'll catch you next week.
Woohoo.